Alright, so Bo Nickal just got body shot KO'd by Renier de Ridder last night at UFC Iowa, and I just know that all 5 of his fans are devastated by this happening. Nickal is, and always has been, a classic example of how the UFC pushes the wrong guy to the moon, hyping him up as some sort of lethal up-and-comer despite the glaring reality that he's been fighting cans and journeymen for his entire career. So the fact that this guy was a minus 350 favorite heading into this fight against a seasoned veteran like RDR just goes to show how the UFC marketing machine can convince fans that a fighter like Bo was even remotely close to elite. Last night's knockout wasn't just a knockout, it was a much needed reality check that both Bo and many fans needed to experience. And yeah, I'm going to be talking about all this and more throughout this video. But first, let's talk about the fight itself. Renier's game plan was really simple and straightforward: pressure Bo and beat him up in the clinch. And even though the game plan might have been a bit one-dimensional, it was still more than enough to get the job done. Because even though he ended up getting taken down in the first round, he wound up reversing the position and finished the round on top. Second round starts, and after some really sloppy counter-striking from Bo, he gladly accepts the clinch about 20 seconds in. RDR failed 2 trip attempts back to back, but he was still able to overwhelm Bo with his offense to the point where he stunned Nickal with a knee to the body, and that opened up Bo to take 13 strikes in a row before he was able to respond. And while he was in survival mode and backpedaling, Nickal ate another massive knee to the body as he threw out a left hand that dropped him for good. And yeah, that's basically the fight, but can we please talk about how ridiculous it was that Bo was the betting favorite heading into this fight? Renier de Ridder isn't just some random guy Dana found at a Waffle House parking lot. This dude is a proven commodity in MMA. He's a former double champion in ONE FC who has actual victories over legitimate competition, unlike Bo. And I understand that the average UFC fan still probably has no idea who RDR is and what he's accomplished, but I also think that's because the UFC has done next to nothing to promote this guy, which is baffling seeing as they probably spent a ton of money acquiring him from ONE FC. On the other hand, Nickal's been marketed like he's a world beater, even though he spent his entire UFC career thus far as a glorified can crusher. And of course he doesn't deserve it because he's aggressively mid at best, but the real issue here is how this is yet another case of the UFC pushing another up-and-comer way too hard way too early. Given their respective experience and credentials in MMA, this fight between Bo and RDR was really suspect matchmaking from Dana and his team. Like, did they really actually think that Bo was going to be good enough to beat RDR just 8 fights into his career? Realistically speaking, there was no fucking way that Bo is going to get the win here, and frankly, I think that this was some pretty irresponsible matchmaking. Because let's be real here, people, Bo's resume up to this point has not been impressive at all, despite how the UFC wants us to think it is. Before stepping into the octagon last night, he was 4-0 in the UFC, with each win coming against fighters who are mediocre at best. Let's take a look at all of his opponents thus far, starting with Jamie Pickett. Nickal submitted him quickly, but Pickett was a tailor-made opponent. Jamie came into the fight on a losing streak and has notoriously weak grappling defense. Regardless, Pickett was just not cut out for the big leagues. He went 2-7 in the UFC, and he retired from fighting after going on a 5-fight losing streak. Then Bo fought Val Woodburn in March of 2023. Laughably, the promotion tried to sell this as a big test for Bo, when in reality, Woodburn was a short-notice replacement who was given almost zero time to prepare. Also, they were clearly too scared of giving him an active fighter on the roster, so they pulled Woodburn up from a regional promotion, hoping that his 7-0 record would fool people into thinking that he was legit. And yes, Bo ended up knocking him out in like 30 seconds, but in hindsight, I think the fact that Woodburn got knocked out by Nickal says way more about Woodburn's lack of striking skills than it says about how good Nickal is as a striker. His next fight was against Cody Brundage at UFC 300, where for truly inexplicable reasons, he was placed higher upon the card than guys like Yuri Prohaska, Aljamain Sterling, Hanato Moicano, and the list goes on. Dana putting this guy who was just 2-0 in the promotion over former UFC champions on the biggest card in the company's history is still crazy for me to think about. And it's not even like they gave him an interesting opponent. They gave him Cody Brundage, who was 4-4 in the UFC at the time. This was such a blatant attempt by Dana to hype up Bo at the expense of more deserving fighters. And sure, he ended up getting the submission win in round 2, but I know that a lot of fans, including myself, were left feeling a bit unimpressed at how long it took him to put Brundage away. Then to top all this off, his next opponent was Paul Craig, who was 1-4 in his last 5 fights, and honestly, Paul's become a bit of a meme lately. And when I tell you that this fight is probably one of the most laughably bad examples of striking in a modern day UFC fight, I really mean it. Don't get me wrong, I understand why strategically Bo didn't want to go for any takedowns against a jiu-jitsu guy like Craig, but all that ended up doing was highlighting just how rudimentary and basic his striking really was. This entire fight was just both guys missing shots at one another while also being too hesitant to close the distance and exchange in the pocket. We also found out in this fight that the only punch that Bo is comfortable throwing is the overhand right. Again, I get why Bo didn't try to take him down, it's smart that he didn't try to wrestle. But seeing as this guy is being built up by the UFC to be one of their next big stars, meanwhile he's boxing at that level is kind of a joke. And you know what? The fans in the arena thought the same thing, because in the closing moments of the fight, the entire venue started chanting overrated, with it obviously being aimed at Bo. And to make matters worse, during his post-fight interview, Bo had the audacity to say that he fought an amazing fight and that he dominated Paul, all while the crowd was audibly booing him. Look, man, I understand that Bo is a super confident guy, and in order to succeed as an MMA fighter, you definitely need a little bit of delusional confidence, but at the same time, he's only hurting himself and his own progress if he's not able to recognize that his execution of his game plan left a lot to be desired, and frankly, this was just a bad fight on top of a bad performance. Bo's wins over the likes of Pickett, Woodburn, Brundage, and Craig are apparently enough to justify giving himself a prestigious and decorated former champion such as RDR. Does that make sense to you? Because it really doesn't for me, and much like in many other cases of blatant UFC hype jobs, when reality hits, it comes crashing hard. Last night, we all saw what actually happens to Bo when he fights a guy who actually knows what he's doing, and to be fair, I'm sure that Bo genuinely thought he was going to win against RDR. That's just the person he is after a lifetime of competing at the highest level, so I can't really blame him. The real culprit here is the UFC marketing, who once again convinced one of their fighters that they were something that they're not after a couple of hand-picked opponent wins. Mind you, Bo is the same guy that has made repeated claims that he would beat Khamzat Chimaev. Nah, bruh, no you wouldn't.
Khamzat Chimaev. You're saying that his wrestling is pretty mid?
It's trash. I won't even say mid.
He's a 3-time Swedish national champion.
That's sick.
12 wins in 3 years, 0 losses.
That's incredible. 12-0 in 3 years. We're going to fight at some point, and people will realize that there's levels.
I've shit on Khamzat in the past for a lot of things, but something that no one can take away from him is that for the most part, he has proven himself against elite level competition. Simply put, Khamzat would cut through Bo like a hot knife through butter, and as decorated as a collegiate wrestler as Bo is, I feel pretty confident that Khamzat would steamroll him. Seeing as de Ridder effortlessly dismantled him, Khamzat would have mauled him just as badly, if not worse. You know, it's funny, the UFC's latest batch of prospects has been absolutely crumbling, and Bo Nickal is just another example. Robelis Despain, Benoit Saint-Denis, Peyton Talbot, all these fighters were excessively hyped and pushed by the UFC marketing machine, and all of them have been brutally exposed. The UFC is outright failing to market and promote the right fighters. Instead, they consistently latch on to prospects with flashy personas or backgrounds that they think will appeal to casual viewers, much like Bo. Dana's too afraid to build up genuine superstars who could eventually have real leverage over them, and the company's short-sightedness in this approach has led to a revolving door of questionable prospects who have all been fraud-checked and forgotten. It's like, hey Dana, instead of trying to convince the world that Bo is legit, how about you actually promote Tom Aspinall, who has all the makings of being a superstar, seeing as he has the personality and the skills to back it up? Or even more simply, how about you stop deciding for us who you think the next big thing is going to be and actually listen to the fans on what up-and-coming fighters might actually have that X factor that you're always talking about? Because even though I'm not counting out Bo quite yet, I still think that he can make a decent career in the UFC. I highly doubt that this guy is ever going to become a champion, let alone fight for a title. Last night confirmed what many fans suspected for a long time: Bo was never going to live up to the manufactured hype. Renier de Ridder didn't just knock him out, he thoroughly exposed the facade of the UFC's promotional tactics. Nickal's devastating loss at UFC Iowa wasn't just a loss, it's a stark reminder that the UFC is trying to force certain fighters down our throats and expect us to accept it without any questions. Let this be a lesson to everyone involved. Stop trying to force stars, start promoting real talent, and spare us from future embarrassments like this one. Anyways, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know what you think about Bo's loss to RDR. Would you call this a fraud check, and where do you think Nickal goes from here? As always, if you like the video, then like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Khamzat Chimaev weighs in. I know you've seen his tweet, but it felt like one of the first times that he's like kind of taking a shot at you.
In response to that, I like to say, yo, who are you fighting at 5-0, bro? Some random dude in Europe. Like, I'm fighting in the UFC on UFC 300. So there's levels to this. Hey, like, I'm that guy, and there's nothing anybody else can do about that. I wouldn't be surprising to me if when we fight, I'm like a minus 1,000 favorite. I don't think he's going to be able to really hurt me or do anything that inflicts so much damage that I'm not going to be able to just widen the gap on him as the fight continues.